Hello and welcome to the Astronomy Management Case Study Strategic Analysis video for the May 2016 exam on Opticians IC Optical. So in this video we're going to go through some of the key points coming out of the pre-scene and also applying some of those models that you'll have learnt throughout your management level studies to the case. Now let's start by looking at the company itself and the industry. So many of you will have read the pre-scene already, some of you will have watched the pre-scene analysis videos. So what we know so far is that the company IC Optical is a successful market leader within the industry, within the fictional country of Sealand. Now, I'm sure that the industry is one that many of you will be very familiar with on a very basic level. I'm sure you've all been to opticians before. Some of you may wear glasses or have worn glasses in the past, so you know a bit about the industry. But do you know anything about how the industry is actually run, the key factors within the industry itself? That's probably a far fewer segment of you. So let's take a look at the case. Now the way this video series is going to work, or this particular video is going to work, is by applying the rational model. Now you can see the rational model here is comprised of 3 different parts, and there's various different models that we use within each one. So for starters, we have where the company is now. If we looked at the company, we looked at IC Optical at where it is now, and we use models such as environment analysis, both the external environment and also the industry itself. And then we look at the company itself, the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats facing the organization, the product range, and various other internal analysis models. We then look at where the company wants to be in the future. If we were to look at the company in 10 years' time, what do we want the company to have achieved? How is it going to come across to the market, to the industry, to the consumer in the future? And finally, how we are going to get there. We know where we are, we know where we want to be, so how do we bridge the gap between the two? And we'll start by looking at where the company ultimately wants to be. So in the future, where do we see IC Optical? And a few of the key things we'll use to assess this is governance, ethics, and the stakeholder mapping model. So let's begin. And we start by looking at mission statements. And I've summarized it here by saying that a mission statement is what is the organization about? What does it want to achieve? Who is it there for? Now, we weren't told any specific mission or objective statements within the pre-scene. So if they don't have one, this could be considered a weakness in the company's approach. And the reason why this is a weakness in the company's approach is because a mission statement helps gel everyone together. Everyone who works within the organization, everyone who contributes to the organization, be they shareholders and various stakeholders, gets bought into the company by a good mission statement. Now, when we were looking at the organization, they had very much an organizational structure, which means that several departments will not have really any connection or dealings with each other. And therefore, they're perhaps not necessarily going to be aware of what each other's doing or working with each other. And therefore, it becomes harder to get everyone to work together. But by having this overall approach of the company, everyone can work towards a common goal. Everyone's in it together to work towards this common goal. And people within certain departments, perhaps departments where the results are not necessarily visible, it acts as a motivating factor. Because even though you're not seeing any direct results, you are aware that you're working towards this end game of the organization. So let's take a look at some of the components of a mission statement. So first of all, we have purpose here. Why does the organization exist? What is it trying to achieve in the long term? Well, we can answer a few of these questions here. The company IC Optical exists to provide good eye care to the public, to the citizens of Zealand. And it is currently the market leader within this industry. So its purpose is also to be the market leader, to continue being the market leader. Next up is strategy. So how is the organization competing? How is it competing with ZimChem, with NewSpecs, those competitors of the company? Now we know that as a lot of the products cannot be differentiated, for example, a lot of the sales and revenues of the company comes from designer frames, and the companies that make the designer frames sell these frames to all the different opticians. So this exact same product is for sale in many different opticians. So it's very hard to differentiate on the product itself. And of course the eye tests as well, they are invoiced against the government. So therefore the government will expect a certain standard of eye test from every single optician. So it's very difficult to set the company aside from ZimChem, from NewSpecs, because ultimately they are all offering a very similar product. Therefore, you have to think about other ways in which the company can compete. So does it compete on price? Does it sell these designer frames for a cheaper price than competitors? Now, we know that the profit margin on these designer frames is very, very high. Therefore, there is possibly room to negotiate, room to sell it at a cheaper price and still maintain a healthy margin. Also, as it's a very, very people-facing business, customer service is a great way in which the company can separate itself. If, for example, IC Optical becomes renowned for good, impartial, friendly advice compared to a competitor, then that could act as a unique selling point within the organization, a way in which it can take customers away from NewSpecs. If, for example, a customer of NewSpecs goes to the pub and starts talking about how, oh, I don't like the optician at NewSpec, they, rush you in, rush you out, and then a friend of theirs is there who is an IC Optical customer, says, well, maybe you should go to IC Optical because they sit you down, treat you really with a smile, really friendly, really nicely. They do not try and force you to buy anything. They just merely suggest what may help your vision. Then that may be a way in which they can gain a customer. That person then thinks, oh, well, next time I'll go to IC Optical instead. Next up is value. So what does the organization stand for? So I've put a few things here: value for money, quality, good customer service feeding on from strategy. Innovation here is another important one. We saw in the case study there was a regular mention about the established research and development department at IC Optical, and also their ties within the universities as well. So they're helping to bring forth the next generation of eye care specialists, so reinvesting in the industry, making the industry more sustainable. And finally, policies. So this is more relative to your employees, how you expect your employees to act. If you expect your employees to act to provide the best customer service, then you have to provide for effective customer training. You have to measure the satisfaction of customers and how you expect them to act ethically. Now, if you are working for a company that is all about trying to generate as much money, it perhaps doesn't respect its customers enough, it's perhaps prescribing glasses to customers they don't really need that level of eye care. It's just that you get a higher profit margin on them if you prescribe this particular set of glasses over that particular set of glasses. So this ties into ethics here. Now, a good example of this would be Johnson & Johnson, because they have this credo, as they call it, which is the policies that they expect all employees to go along with. And that as well is all about acting ethically. And if you go into their building, you see the credo on the wall as you go in. And it's considered to be an offence of an employee to act in a way that is not credo compliant, as it were. So that's the missions of the organization, the ultimate end game of the organization. The next step is measuring how they are doing, how they are getting there. And we do this through objectives and performance measurement. Now, the first thing I said here is that they weren't really given any specific targets in the case study. There was no list of goals and accomplishments that the organization wants to achieve. At the moment, we know that they are the market leader within the opticians industry. And that could have been a target long ago, but now that they've got here, they need to reset the targets. They need a new target. Now, given that we weren't given any, could be that we are given one within the unseen exam. Now, if we aren't, then again, this is another weakness in the company's approach. I've put a bit here about the balanced scorecard. Now, the balanced scorecard is essentially a list of non-performance related objectives and financial objectives as well. It's a range of balanced, as it were, as the name suggests. Now, in the olden days, often companies only went by how much money they made, how much profit they made, because it was shareholders were considered the main stakeholder to appease. But of course, these days we know better than that. And various perspectives of which we can assess the company based on the balanced scorecard are from the employee perspective, from the customer perspective, and from the market perspective. Now, all of these are incredibly important to the organization, and there are different factors we can use to assess these. So with employees, we could look at how satisfied employees are, how motivated they are, and we can use employee turnover to see evidence of this. If there's a very high employee turnover, then maybe it's that employees are upset with the way that they are treated, with the way that they are compensated for their work. Now, market perspective could be the market share of the organization. Of course, we know that the company is the number one company within the industry. And customer perspective, again, about repeat business, customer satisfaction. You could offer surveys, and therefore you would find out whether customers were truly satisfied with the organization. And all of these put together helps the company to be successful. For example, if you've got very high employee turnover, a new employee, even if they have a slightly lower salary than an experienced employee, may cost you more because they are not as good as at their job. They require more training and more time away from actually getting on with their job. So these are other ways in which we can look at the company. If these are all satisfied, if they score highly within these perspectives, then that is a good way of measuring the performance of the organization. So now we move on to governance. And as this is not a UK-based company, there's no mandatory requirement to follow governance, but they are a listed organization. So there are things that they could learn from it. And essentially, governance is all just about controlling and running the organization in a way that is ethical and sustainable in the long run. And there are various ways in which the UK Code of Governance provides for this. So we have separate chairman and CEO. So the chairman obviously is the head of the board, and the CEO is head of the company. And you have the same person both setting the strategies and the same person making sure the company fulfills and meets those strategies and goals, then you're unlikely to be too progressive, because the person will set goals that they know that they can achieve because it makes them look like they've done a great job. You need independent, non-executive directors to ensure that the executive directors are not doing things for themselves, because of course the executive directors are employed by the company, and the company's yearly performance reflects their bonuses, and therefore they may run the company in a way that is beneficial for the short term but not for the long term. But of course, owners of the company want sustainable long-term growth. They don't want to leverage short-term performance against long-term performance. Next, we have audit, nomination, remuneration committees populated by non-executive directors. So these are the committees that look into the board, look into the executive directors to ensure that they are running the company fairly. They're responsible for appointing non-executive directors, so ensuring that the right people with the right skills are employed by the company. And also the remuneration committee, they decide on how the directors are paid, how they are compensated for their work, so to ensure fair pay for fair work. And also risk management. Now, risks affect any business, big or small, and the smallest risks can become larger if they are not properly dealt with. So it's always important to have a board that is looking out for risks and ensuring that they do not become more of a threat to the organisation than they need be. And I've got some other bits here about information and decision making, so ensuring that the right controls are in place so that the directors have the right information to make the right decisions. If the directors are making strategies for the organisation but they have no information about how the company is doing, they have no information about the industry, etc., then those strategies may not be feasible, they may not fit in with what is possible. And finally, to ensure that they have regular meetings with shareholders, of the owners of the organisation, basically, to ensure that the owners' needs are being met, that any questions they may have about the organisation are being answered. So let's take a look at governance when we apply it to the case study. Now, first of all, they only have 4 non-executive directors when they have 5 executive directors. So that's less than 50% of the directors are executive, and governance says that you should have half and half. However, it's not necessarily good governance, but it's not necessarily bad governance as well, because of course 4v5 is not that big a difference. If, for example, they had 7 or 8 executive directors and only 1 or 2 non-executive directors, that would be more of a breach of the code of governance. But they also have a very questionable chairman, a questionable independence. And the reason for this is because he was the former CEO of the organisation and one of the co-founders, so may have shares within the organisation still. And if they have shares within the organisation, then they are not necessarily independent. They are not in it purely to maintain the standards within the organisation, because they are getting something out of the organisation. Even if they're not an executive director getting a direct salary from it, the fact that the organisation's share price will also be affected by the actions, the day-to-day actions of the board, could lead people to question the independence of the chairman, of the co-founder, if he still has shares within the company. Now, when we look at those 3 committees, the audit, the nomination and remuneration committee, these need to be populated by non-executive directors, and non-executive directors who are not the chairman ideally. And we see they did have 3 people, which is the generally suggested amount on the audit nomination committees. However, the chairman featured on both of them, and the chairman should ideally not be part of these committees. And there was also no mention of a remuneration committee. It's not to say that they don't have one, but if they don't have one, then that is definitely a weakness of the company's governance. And finally, here's some lesser known parts of the code of governance that were just not mentioned at all within the briefing. We had no information about whether they hold an AGM or whether they have meetings with their shareholders, nor how the information is passed up to the director level. We know they have an organisational structure, so you would think that the information would flow up the hierarchy, but there was no express mention of how the directors receive information about the performances of the organisation. So I hope you've enjoyed this sample video and more importantly found it useful. Before I go, I'd like to quickly tell you about a few of the products that we do here at Astranti Financial Training, specifically for our case study courses. We have a study text which details all the key theories in which you will be expected to use in your case study exam, as well as details of how to approach the pre-scene and the case study. We also have a series of course videos detailing how to answer case study questions. This is actually an area in which many students struggle. Most of the scripts that I've seen, the failing scripts that I've seen, has actually been due to poor case study technique rather than lack of knowledge. We also have a series of pre-scene analysis videos based on the current up-to-date pre-scene, detailing all the key bits of information and likely issues you may face in the exam. Next up is the industry analysis, a pack detailing information about the industry that the pre-scene company resides in, information about the key players within that industry, and more background information on the industry in general. We also have a range of mock exams created for each level and based on the current pre-scene, which is a great way to get some practice in before you sit the real thing. We also offer marking and feedback on those mock exams so you can see where you are going wrong and where you can improve. Finally, we have the master classes. These are 2 one-day classes taken by our expert tutors to give you all the hints and tips you need to really add to your chances of passing the exam. Also, if you take our full course, we offer a pass guarantee, which, provided you have met all the requirements of the pass guarantee, you will get a free resit on the next exam should you fail to pass. So once again, thank you for your time. If you're interested in any of these products, please visit the website www.astranti.com for more information. Thank you.